Hello everyone and welcome. Thank you for tuning into the video today. Thanks to my very poor impulse control and bad decisions, I am now the proud owner of this beautiful Selmer Rosewood professional Contra Alto clarinet. So today I thought I'd give you a review of this instrument, tell you some things that I like about it, some things that I don't like about it, and just give you my general overall opinion. So without further ado, let's get started. So I think I'd like to first start off by playing a chromatic scale from the low E, which is the lowest note on this instrument, up to the high clarinet C. So if you were listening carefully, you may have noticed the first anomaly with this instrument. So the middle clarinet B has a very interesting problem. Because the lowest note of this instrument is a low E, the clarinet B now issues from the bell instead of the low E flat tone hole. And that creates a problem for several reasons. The most obvious problem that this causes is that the tone color of the note is now no longer the same as the notes around it. So if I were to play from A to C, you can hear that the B sounds different. And this can be a problem for several reasons. If you're trying to play a smooth passage, that one note is going to stick out and it's going to sound very unusual. And it also, the resistance of it is different. So if you're, it can kind of annoy you if you're not really used to it. If you're not used to playing this instrument, it's going to feel weird. But Selmer actually did correct this with their newer instruments because they now go to low E flat. In fact, my other Contra Alto clarinet that I bought, and I don't know why I have two of them now, but whatever, actually has a range to low E flat, and of course doesn't have that problem because clarinet B comes out of a tone hole. So it's just something to look out for with these older instruments. If it does have a low E, it's not just a matter of you're missing an extra note at the bottom of the range. It does affect notes above that. Some other things about this instrument, the neck angle, it's not the worst. It is somewhat close to the horizontal, more so than I would like, but it's not entirely uncomfortable. It does come into the mouth at a fairly comfortable angle, so I don't see any reason to try and change that. This instrument does have a floor peg, which is nice. The cheaper Bundy Contra Alto clarinets do not have a floor peg. They just have a little like rubber ball or stopper here at the end that you sort of rest the instrument on, which works if you're exactly the right height and have the right share. Otherwise, it's probably going to be either too high or too low, which can be a very annoying problem. So it's nice that you have some degree of adjustability with this instrument. Like instruments of this vintage from Selmer, it does have unplated nickel keywork. It actually developed a really nice patina, and a lot of people like to polish these up and clean them up and make them look shiny. I don't like to do that. I think they look great like this, so this instrument's probably going to stay like that. Other than that, pretty similar to the newer models. Of course, it has a rosewood body. Some of these are actually made in grenadilla. You can find them. They do show up occasionally. They're not very common, but the reason for that is because rosewood, when you have sections of wood this long, I think the longest section is probably somewhere around 2.5, 3 feet, it's very hard to find pieces of grenadilla that long that don't have flaws in them. Rosewood, on the other hand, you can find big pieces like that. So it makes sense both economically and just from a manufacturer standpoint to try and make these larger instruments out of rosewood. So that's why you tend to see them like this. Now, the rosewood is part of the reason why these instruments are so popular. It's not necessarily just because they're such great playing instruments or because they have a beautiful tone. It's because the rosewood is just so beautiful, it's so unique, it really stands out. If you want an instrument to set yourself apart, you couldn't really do much better than this. And because of that, the resale value of these things has been crazy. Like even old instruments like this regularly sell for $3,000, $4,000. Now the only reason I got this is obviously it has seen better days. In fact, why don't I go through the things that are broken in this instrument? So let's start with the top. So there's supposed to be a little ring here that connects the neck to the body of the instrument. That's missing. The little lyre screw is missing. Oh, I'm actually missing a key too. So the FC key that's normally played by the left-hand pinky is missing. Although I do have a key from another bass clarinet that I have to cut it to the right size and solder the pieces together. So I can replace that. That's no big deal. It was missing a mouthpiece when I got it, but that's no big deal. Fortunately, I have a mouthpiece that are faced. There is still a crack. Well, there was a crack, and somebody tried to repair it. What they did was they essentially grafted a new section of rosewood onto the body where the socket is, because the big old socket cracked. And they did a really nice job of this, but unfortunately, the new socket also cracked. It's kind of hard to see, but there's a crack that goes from the end to the tone hole. So that's part of the reason why I was able to afford this instrument in the first place. It was just so beat up that I managed to snag it up for a pretty cheap price. But fortunately, all these issues are correctable. They can be fixed. Cracks can be filled in, parts can be remade. The one thing about instruments of this vintage you want to look out for is intonation. Now, I will say, with this instrument, I'm actually quite surprised with the intonation. Individual notes are off, but the notes above them, essentially the notes in the upper register and the notes in the lower register that they correspond to, like, for example, low D, high A, if they're off in the same direction, which means that when I go and eventually overhaul this instrument, I can simply put a tuning crescent or something in there, or fill in the hole a little bit, and I can bring both of those notes into tune, and I can do that for the whole instrument. Even the where 12ths on older bass clarinets, especially Selmer's, the low E, clarinet B, the 12th between them tends to be very wide. On this instrument, it's no more than 10 cents, which is nothing to worry about. So that's nice to see that this instrument, even though it is very old, it doesn't have bad intonation like a lot of older instruments. And if I wanted to, and I probably will, I'm going to go through and correct everything, and it'll play darn near perfect in tune. So that's good to see. This instrument does have a fully automatic double register mechanism, so you have one vent on the neck and another vent for both the throat B flat and the B, C, C sharp, D, D sharp of the clarinet register. So that's pretty much a must-have feature on anything larger than bass clarinet. So it's pretty much expected to see. Other than that, it's a pretty typical instrument, what you'd expect for a low clarinet like this. As far as playing characteristics though, I used to think that these instruments weren't that different than the cheaper Bundies, but as I've come to find out, they actually play quite well. They have a little bit narrower bore, and they have a very nice, pretty bass clarinet sound. I really didn't understand why these were going for such a high price until I played one, and I see that now that they're, despite the fact that they are expensive, they are very, very much worth it. I think that's a very wonderful instrument, and contrary to what many people think, Contra Alto clarinets are not just a cheaper version of contrabass clarinets. The nice thing about Contra Alto is because it's in the key of E flat, you can actually just read bass clef parts. So bassoon music, string bass music, tuba music, although some of the lower notes you have to transpose up. But it opens up a whole bunch of repertoire that you can now play thanks to the fact that you have an instrument in E flat. So I think for that reason, contraltos are very useful, and it's a very good extra clarinet to have if you already play bass and B flat clarinet. So in conclusion, I would say that this is a very decent instrument. They tend to be on the pricey side, but I can see why, and I think it is definitely worth it for if you're in the market for a contralto. So my hope now is to get this instrument. I'm going to go through it and I'm going to restore everything. Obviously it needs a ton of work, but as I said before, nothing that's not fixable. And I think when I'm done, it'll be a great player. So thank you everyone for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please let me know if you have any questions or comments about this instrument, and I will do my best to answer them. Also, if you enjoy reviews and videos like this, please consider subscribing to my channel. Also, check out my Instagram @WindsInstrumentRepairs, where I post pictures of my projects and other instruments from my collection. Alright everyone, thanks for watching.